And we want to bring you this discussion now. Election observers, they play an incredibly important role insofar as ensuring that the elections are transparent, free and fair, and that the outcome is actually accepted by voters, by political parties and by independent candidates as well. So with the 1st of November's elections now come and gone, what's the next step for the local government observers who have crisscrossed the country? In fact, we're in conversation now with the Chairperson of Elections Monitoring Network, Nkosikhulule Nyembezi, who joins us via our video link this morning. Nkosikhulule, thanks very much for your time on the program. I mean, the work of election observers, it's not just about election day, it's also about the build-up to election day.
Yes, of course, because the road to elections is very important, because that right, Section 19 in the Constitution, talks about the freedom of people to associate with others in terms of political views or to disassociate, and also to express their views freely. So to the extent that we are seeing election candidates conveying their election promises, we had to ensure that they do that in a conducive manner where nobody is prevented from associating and from hearing those views. And despite the challenges that we have seen, everything was successful this time around.
So that's in the build-up to the election. On election day, what are you looking out for?
We look to see if voting stations open on time, they have the necessary material, ballot papers and the machines, and they are able to process voters on the line. And also to see that the voting parameter is protected, so that there are no prohibited activities taking place within the voting parameter, particularly with respect to political parties who tend to want to continue campaigning on the day of the elections. And of course, during the voting, we want to also see people who need assistance, that they are assisted properly without any due influence, whether you are blind or you are infirm. And party agents inside the voting station play a crucial role in ensuring that everything is done according to the agreement and according to the law. Towards the end of voting, we also wish to see if there are no long lines. If there are long lines, that everybody who is in the line is afforded an opportunity after the closing time, so that everything runs smoothly. And to the extent that the distribution of voters in each voting station was an average of 1,300, so you would see that the voting stations managed to cope with the number of voters that wanted to be processed.
There's also the issue of how we deal with vulnerable sectors of voters on election day. There were particular complaints from Deaf South Africa, the Association for the Blind and Visually Impaired. They had numerous complaints from their own members about the treatment of their members on voting day. The same goes for people with disabilities, wheelchair access to voting stations as well.
That is true. I mean, our strong component of our election monitoring constituency, like the KwaZulu-Natal Christian Council, the KwaZulu-Natal Interfaith Council, and other councils in other provinces, they are people who deal with these, with all sorts of people in their churches, in their mosque, places of worship. But also, it's something we had talked about during voter education periods since July this year, to say there needs to be facilitation of the election process to accommodate people with disabilities. Sign language, it was absent in these elections, either in the form of election campaigns, but also in terms of what was happening during the voting time. So I think it's something that we will have to take up with the Electoral Commission, to the extent that it affected a lot of people in a number of voting stations across the country.
In terms of, some of the other issues that have been raised by voters as well, the issue of the voter management devices, that's been a big theme insofar as the complaints against the IEC is concerned. we still don't know the exact number of people who were unable to cast their vote, specifically due to the VMDs, but the number is as high as 100,000. It might even exceed that number.
It is a serious problem. I encountered it myself because midday on November 1, I was in Mahlabatini to witness Prince Nkosikhulule's voting. His daughter-in-law, who came to the voting station to vote with him, couldn't vote because the machine could not pick up her name, and yet she was registered in that district. The IEC had explained on the 1st of November that this was a problem that was brought into their attention, and that they had attempted to send SMSs to people who might have been turned away in the morning for them to come back. But we all know that it might be that they didn't have, not everyone might have received that SMS, and there is a significant number of people who couldn't vote because they were turned away. We understand the explanation that voter registration weekend occurred, and then the proclamation of the election date happened immediately after the voter registration weekend. So it meant that what was on the printed voters' roll fell short of reflecting people who registered during the voter registration weekend. So the machines that were supposed to pick up these names, they failed in a number of stations throughout the country. But I mean, it's not something that is unsurmountable, in the hope that while it disadvantages the voters in the counting and the tallying process and the allocation of seats, then the IEC will be able to come up with a mathematical equation to compensate for this mishap, such that the allocation of seats proportionally represents what would have been a fair number of people who came in to vote.
So post-election day, all of the issues that you've outlined now, this is what you'll be keeping an eye on, because your job really is threefold, isn't it? It's the pre-election period, it's election day, and then the post-election period.
Of course, in the post-election period, that is why you find that civil society and election observers would still need support from donors, because we now see that there are a number of ward councils where we'll have to have by-elections immediately after this result is declared, because the candidates there have died either because of natural causes, COVID, or some other reasons. And also because we have an increase in the number of hung municipalities where you will now have coalition governments. It then means anytime there is a by-election in any of those municipalities, it's going to be hotly contested, because it is likely to change the political landscape, to change the balance of power in each of these municipalities, small and big. And so the role of election observers will remain significant to the extent that we will have to attend into this. We congratulate South Africans in the manner in which they voted, because they have demonstrated that they are moving away from party dominance. The coalition governments we are going to see are a good challenge, so that each one of the political parties in those municipalities understands that they must put aside their narrow political interests and concentrate on servicing the people. Of course, still being compliant with the Electoral Code of Conduct without having to cause violence, intimidation, or any of those things that are unacceptable, which we usually see when the results are declared and some people are reluctant to accept the outcome.
Nkosikhulule, Nyembezi, thanks very much for your time this morning. We do appreciate it. He's the chairperson of Elections Monitoring Network, joining us via our video link this morning.